Inside Washington's Museum of the Bible, a single volume that is like no other, the so-called Slave Bible.
It's an historic exhibit that tells the story of Jesus to those living in the very town where Jesus was born.
In 1958, a physicist at the University of Illinois sat down with a pencil, a sheet of equations, and a question that nobody had thought to put numbers to. What happens if the human population keeps accelerating at the rate it has for the past 2,000 years? He ran the calculations. He checked them twice. And then he published his answer in the journal Science, one of the most respected scientific publications on Earth. The date he arrived at was Friday, November 13th, 2026. That was the year the math said it all breaks down. The year the curve goes vertical. Not from a crystal ball, not from a mystic's vision, from equations. Published in a peer-reviewed journal in 1960 and reported by Time magazine under a headline that should make you stop scrolling. Doomsday in 2026 AD. Now, before you dismiss that, hold on. Because that prediction, strange as it sounds, is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. A puzzle that stretches back 3,000 years, passes through a peer-reviewed mathematics journal, winds through the work of a brilliant Israeli mathematician, and arrives at a question that the scientific establishment still doesn't have a clean answer to. Let me take you back, way back, to the oldest code-breaking mystery in history. There's an ancient Jewish tradition, passed down orally for centuries, that says something is hidden inside the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. Not between the lines, not in the margins, inside the letters themselves. A second layer of text, invisible to anyone reading the words normally, woven into the fabric of the scripture like a message folded inside a message. For most of history, this was considered mysticism, Kabbalistic lore, interesting to rabbis, irrelevant to scientists. Then computers arrived, and everything changed. In 1994, 3 researchers, Israeli mathematician Eliyahu Rips, physicist Doron Witztum, and computer scientist Yoav Rosenberg, published a paper in Statistical Science, a respected, peer-reviewed academic journal published by the Institute of Mathematical Statistics. The paper was titled Equidistant Letter Sequences in the Book of Genesis, and what it claimed was, by any measure, extraordinary. The technique they used was called ELS, Equidistant Letter Sequences. Here's how it works. You take the entire Hebrew text of Genesis. You strip out all the spaces. You're left with a wall of 78,064 consecutive Hebrew consonants. Then you pick a starting letter, choose a skip number, say every 50th letter, and read what comes out. Like pulling a thread from a tapestry and finding words woven into the weave that you'd never see looking at the surface. What Rips and his team claimed they found was staggering. They took a list of 34 famous rabbis from a Hebrew encyclopedia, rabbis who lived centuries or even millennia after the Torah was written, and searched for their names as equidistant letter sequences in Genesis. Then they searched for the dates of their births and deaths, and they found that the names and dates appeared in statistically significant proximity to each other, far closer than random chance should allow. The probability they calculated? 1 in 62,500. A result that, by the standards of most scientific disciplines, qualifies as extraordinary. The journal's editor, Robert Cass, published the paper not as an endorsement, but as what he called a challenging puzzle. He was essentially telling the mathematical community, "We can't explain this result. Can you?" The paper landed like a bomb. And then came Michael Drosnin. In 1997, Drosnin, a former Washington Post reporter, published a book called The Bible Code that turned the academic paper into a global sensation. Drosnin took Rips' ELS method and ran with it, claiming he had found encoded predictions of modern events inside the Torah. The assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, the Gulf War, the Oklahoma City bombing. He said he had even sent a letter to Rabin a year before his death, warning him based on what the code revealed. The book became a New York Times bestseller. Hollywood actors Kirk Douglas and Jason Alexander hosted seminars about it. Warner Brothers bought the film rights, and millions of people around the world began to believe that the Hebrew Bible contained a hidden layer of prophecy encoded thousands of years ago that accurately predicted the future. But here's where this story takes a very sharp turn, because the scientific community didn't just sit and watch. A team of mathematicians led by Brendan Mackay of the Australian National University, along with Dror Bar-Natan, Maya Bar-Hillel, and Gil Kalai, spent years examining the original RIPS experiment. In 1999, they published their rebuttal in the same journal, Statistical Science. The paper was reviewed by 4 senior statisticians chosen by the journal. Their conclusion was devastating. They argued that the original experiment was fatally defective, that the apparently miraculous result was an artifact of the choices made in designing the experiment, the selection of which rabbi names to use, which spellings to include, how to measure proximity. Small changes in these choices, they showed, could make the effect appear or disappear at will. And then Mackay did something that became legendary in mathematics circles. Drosnin had been challenged by reporters about whether other books might produce similar codes. His response was bold and direct. He said that when his critics find a message about the assassination of a prime minister encrypted in Moby Dick, he'd believe them. So Mackay went looking, and he found them. Not one, many. Using the exact same ELS technique that Drosnin applied to the Torah, Mackay found encoded references to the assassinations of Yitzhak Rabin, John F. Kennedy, Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., and the death of Princess Diana, all inside Herman Melville's novel about a whale. He found the name of Rabin's assassin. He found the university the assassin attended. He even found references to the September 11th attacks inside rap lyrics, using the same method. Mackay's point was elegant and brutal. None of these patterns were real predictions. They were statistical noise. When you have hundreds of thousands of letters arranged in a grid, and you're free to choose any starting point, any skip length, any direction, and any language-flexible spelling, you will always find patterns. The human brain is wired to see meaning in randomness, and the ELS method, applied without strict constraints, exploits that wiring mercilessly. As Caltech mathematics professor Barry Simon put it, what the codemakers do is look at a lot of possibilities, and when they have a hit, they wave their hands and say, "Look at me, I got a hit." And there are so many possibilities that you can find things anywhere. A researcher named Dave Thomas even found an ELS in Drosnin's own book that spelled out, "The code is a silly snake oil hoax." Now here's where the story doesn't end the way you'd expect. Because despite the rebuttal, despite Moby Dick, despite the mathematical community's overwhelming rejection, the debate didn't die. It mutated. Rips himself, the original mathematician, distanced himself from Drosnin's book and its sensational claims. He publicly stated that using the codes to predict the future is absolutely unfounded. But he continued to believe in the underlying phenomenon, that something genuinely anomalous exists in the statistical structure of the Torah's text. Even Harold Gans, a former senior cryptologist at the United States National Security Agency, conducted his own independent experiment using cities associated with the rabbis rather than dates, and reported results that he considered statistically significant. And Robert Haralick, a professor of computer science at the City University of New York, spent years running his own experiments, extending the analysis beyond the minimal ELS distances that the original study used. He presented his findings at the International Conference on Pattern Recognition in 2006, and reported that the original list of rabbis remained statistically successful far deeper into the text than any control experiment could match. So what's actually going on? Is there a code, or isn't there? The honest answer is that mainstream mathematics considers the question closed. The 1999 rebuttal is accepted by the overwhelming majority of statisticians. The original result is attributed to the extreme sensitivity of the experiment to data selection, what scientists call researcher degrees of freedom, the hundreds of tiny, often unconscious choices that can nudge an experiment toward a desired result. But the uncomfortable truth is that the debate exposed something real, not about prophecy, about mathematics itself, about the terrifying power of large numbers. The Torah contains 304,805 Hebrew letters. The number of possible ELS combinations in a text that size is not millions. It's billions upon billions. And in a search space that vast, meaningful-looking patterns aren't just possible, they're guaranteed. Every text of sufficient length will produce them. The Bible, Moby Dick, War and Peace, a phone book. And that's the part that should genuinely unsettle you, because the same principle that makes Bible codes an illusion also governs the way we extract patterns from stock markets, medical studies, climate data, and AI training sets. The human mind, and increasingly the machines we build, are pattern recognition engines, operating in a universe that generates meaningless patterns at industrial scale. The line between signal and noise is far thinner than we want to believe. Now, about 2026. Professor Heinz von Förster's 1960 equation wasn't a prophecy. It was a mathematical demonstration. He showed that if you plot human population growth over 2 millennia on a curve, the function doesn't level off. It goes hyperbolic. It approaches infinity. And the date at which the curve goes vertical, the theoretical singularity, was November 13th, 2026. He didn't believe the world would literally end. He was showing that exponential acceleration, whether in population or technology or any other domain, eventually reaches a point where the existing rules can't hold. Something has to break. Something has to change. He published that equation 66 years ago, and here we are, in 2026, the year the math said the curve hits the wall. Whether you look at this through the lens of ancient scripture, modern statistics, or a physicist's chalkboard, the same theme keeps emerging. Humanity has always been obsessed with the idea that the future is knowable, that if you look hard enough, deep enough, at enough letters, enough data points, enough equations, you'll find the thread that tells you what comes next. The Bible code promised that the thread was woven into sacred text. Mathematics proved it was an illusion. But the need to find it, the desperate human need to believe the future has already been written, that something somewhere already knows what happens next, that need hasn't gone anywhere. And that, perhaps, is the real code. Not hidden in Genesis, hidden in us. The pattern we can't stop looking for, even when we know it isn't there.